Welcome to Only One You Need Radio. We're not the only one you need. You are. We just show you how to get out of your own way. With your host, speaker, author, business coach, and consultant, David Dubé.
Welcome to Only One You Need Radio. It's your host, David Dubé. I'm so excited to have you here with me today. In this episode, my friend, you and I are going to be discussing motivation. Now, two parts within motivation. First is going to be the 5 types of motivation. And then we're going to talk about the levels of motivation. Now, with the 5 types of motivation, this is a very interesting gauge of whether someone is selfish or selfless, and whether they're moving on a low form or a high form of motivation. Now, at the lowest form, we have money motivation. Someone who's attaining money, in essence, for power, for the purpose of just having more money. And then the next form, which goes hand in hand with this, is ego motivation, which is power and sex typically. And these are both the lowest forms of motivation. They're also the most selfish form of motivation. You know, in the previous episodes, I talked about money and the perception of money. These individuals don't perceive money the way I shared there. In this case, it's a physical thing that they're chasing, that they're trying to attain. There's no separation there, as if to talk about in the previous episode where it's an energy form. So moving up from that, so the number 5, or the lowest form, is money motivation. The next lowest form is that of ego. And then moving one up from that is going to be the ethics-based and morality-based motivation. This one is very interesting to me. This one is being in between the selfish and the selflessness. It's still on the selfish side, for the fact that the individuals believe that they are better than those below them. And if you aren't as moral as they are, well, then you're deemed wrong. You're incorrect. And that comes with many different teachings out there. Some of these people are, they're righteous when it comes to politics, or they're righteous when it comes to everything's black and white. There's no gray here for so many of these individuals. And so this can be a religious teaching, religious practices. This can be political practices, political teachings, all those types of things that they feel as though, whether or not they're at an education level higher than you, that they're still better than you. And that they correct you because they feel that they're going to make you better by correcting you. It's a form of motivation for them that gives them a boost, and they don't feel that necessarily that they're getting a boost out of it, but they know in their mind that you are wrong. And it's crazy how this one works, because there's someone so close to me in my life that is this way, and it's so interesting to realize the dynamics of how and why they're there that way. Now, they don't believe that they're very egotistical at all, albeit it's extremely ego-esque to be that way. It's super interesting. So, if you're younger than them, don't have the education they have, or you're not taught the way they're taught, then you are typically wrong. So that's a very interesting type of motivation. Now let's move on up from that. Here's where we start to get into selflessness and the higher forms, is right here. This is personal conviction. And these are typically the self-starters, and a lot of people in the entrepreneurial realm land here. They have a personal conviction about something, a story of something that's driving them, that's moving them to want better, to have better for themselves in their life. And this is less egoic than the 3 previous forms by far, and it's still not the highest. And oftentimes, this is where there's a duality that's taking place. And the duality is this: they understand and they see the way society is. And because of that, they're trying to create their business or their motivation is within the society. They feel that they need to keep it within society for it to work out. And this is where the downfall of this motivation type lands. And it's interesting because the next level is way beyond that. And so, well, let's talk about that level. That the highest form of motivation in the 5 types is the purpose-based motivation. The purpose being so greatly greater than who you are as an individual that it has to happen, that there's no question that it's not going to come to fruition. And some people start at the level 2 and they end up moving into level 1, which is where one would want to be, for the fact that it becomes so much more than them that there's no way it couldn't happen. So think of Elon Musk for an example here. And think about his first main business, the first thing that he was a part of, which is PayPal. Now, PayPal may have been for him just a personal conviction as when he started it up, but it took on a different face. It took on a different thing once he put it into the market. It decentralized essentially the way money was transferred on the internet, giving entrepreneurs an ability to change and exchange money for digital products all over the place, and really helped the internet become the Wild West, and drove a lot of what entrepreneurs, even to this day, are able to do because of what he first started with. And now think of Tesla Motors, how big and massive Tesla has become because of an idea that he had and a purpose and a motivation that was greater than him to put something out there for the masses to use. The purpose is huge. It's bigger than him. And therefore it took off and created its own thing, even without him, as he's focusing now more on SpaceX, it seems, than he is on Tesla Motors. Not to say that he's not working with Tesla Motors. I'm just like, he's created something that has its own momentum now because of what he's done. And it's pretty incredible. So now let's talk about the levels of motivation. Levels of motivation. The bottom level when it comes to motivation is that of the unmotivatables. This is 27% roughly of the populace lands here. They're the critics. They're the ones who they don't want to change. And it's interesting how this here can coincide with the 3 lower levels, as it were, even where ego motivation, or the 5 types, the ego motivation, the money motivated for sure, where they feel and see things through, once again, their own paradigm, their own circumstances, and people will cling on to what they know so hard, so much so, because they don't want life to change. They're so used to feeling a certain way, being a certain way, that it scares the shit out of them to change. And so therefore they will point fingers, throw stones at people who are making waves and who are really doing doing the change to help people understand and achieve more in their lives. It's so interesting how this works. Now, these guys are also considered water. And I'll explain that as we go along. So the unmotivatables, 27% of the populace. Now we have the motivatables. This is 60%. And these are the ones who they hang around. They are who they hang around. So if they hang around people who are unmotivated, they typically tend to move in that direction. If they hang around people who are more successful, they'll move up because of that. If they hang around people just like them, they're probably going to stay within that circle. But they're motivatable. And these are the ones who are they're capable of turning on fire and doing what one is told to do and being a part of a team and helping to create momentum, they're the motivatable. They're 60% of the populace. They're the fire. Now, if we move up from that, we have the self-motivated. Here's once again where we find the self-starter and the entrepreneur. They're the self-motivated. This is roughly 10% of the populace. They're the sparks. Oftentimes they hang out with the fire and then they have an idea that comes to them and they're like, I think I got to do this. And then they go along with it. And then they start to seek out other ways to get further and further ahead. And so they're the spark. For these, they're also capable of motivating the ones below, but oftentimes they tend to be like the solopreneur and doing things on their own and trying to figure out everything on their own. And this is the biggest difference between them and the top, the 3%. The 3% are the motivators. Now, they're called the fuel because they're the ones who can make everything transform. They're the ones who are by far the biggest to the motivatables. These are the leaders who lead teams, lead organizations, lead groups, where the self-motivated, if you think about that, right? The entrepreneur doing things and figuring out everything on their own, hitting their head time and time and time again, trying to figure it out, where the motivators are the ones who figured out that they can't do it all themselves. And because of that, they have to have a team. They have to start a team. They have to get people to do things that they can't do that serve them on a greater scale. And you can tell, too, those who are the motivators are the purpose-driven individuals. They're the ones who they have that fire that's never going to go out because that fuel is constantly being poured into them by their purpose. So, drastic comparisons here between these sets. And the interesting thing that I find out of all of this is that how many of us have struggled with our purpose, struggled to figure out who we are, what we're doing, why we're here. And it's so interesting to me how so many really have such a hard and difficult time trying to figure out that purpose. And we'll use conviction as much as possible until we find our purpose. Because when we find our purpose, life begins to transform and change, and it molds to us instead of us molding to it. Living within society's rules, but doing as we need to, as we must do, and watching society mold to us as opposed to the converse of that, which is the way most people lead and live their life because they're so afraid of change. They're so afraid to transform themselves and their paradigms in order to get ahead. To me, it's mind-blowing when you really begin to look at it on a different level, when you separate yourself from what you know, because your identity often is created through the lens of your past, which I talked about on a way earlier episode. And if you haven't heard that, make sure you go back and listen to it because it's so transformative to look at things from a new perspective. And when you do that, when you can separate yourself from that which is to that which is unknown, that's when life really can transform for you. And that's where finding your purpose comes in. So if this was useful, if this was helpful to you, if you learned something from this and you feel other people could learn from this, please do me a favor and share this with other people. Do other people a favor and share this with them. Help other people. Don't be an egotistical dick and keep this for yourself. Share this with other people, shall we? And then if you're on iTunes, rate us. Subscribe to us. If you're on YouTube, subscribe to this channel. Get more of this information on a constant and consistent basis. I'm David Dubé with Only One You Need. It's time that you be the person you're meant to be. Believe in all that you're capable of and become more than you thought imaginable. I look forward to chatting with you on the next episode. Take care.